There's no question that Inception is one of the best action thrillers of all time, but it also has some of the best cinematography of an action thriller of all time. But what goes into that? Because it won Wally Pfister his Oscar, but what actually makes Inception's cinematography so mind-boggling? Well, in today's video, I'm going to take a look at the equipment Pfister used, his use of lighting to suggest an environment, as well as some of the techniques he and Nolan used to achieve the dreamlike atmosphere, notably the rotating corridor. Now, this might surprise you, well, not if you've seen Inception, but this is one of the few Nolan films to not use IMAX at all. However, he did opt for 65mm in certain scenes. The reason for not using it though is best explained in Nolan's words. We wanted to do a lot of handheld in many very confined locations to get a documentary feel, and there was a lot of physically challenging work planned. Now, this is going to be a bit of a mouthful, but these are all of the cameras that Pfister used on Inception. So, the Arriflex 235, Arriflex 435 ES, Beaumont VistaVision, Panavision 65HR, Panavision Panaflex Millennium XL2, Panavision Panaflex System 65 Studio, Photosonics 4C and Photosonics 4ER. So, out of all of these, what would have been the primary camera? Well, my guess is the Millennium XL2. As not only is it rather lightweight, or it can be, it has the ability to house 1000-foot rolls, but it's also one of the most reliable film cameras out there. The only other primary camera option I can imagine would have been the 435 ES. However, looking at Pfister's other films, Panavision always seems to be the choice, with Arri lurking around somewhere. As for the VistaVision camera, as far as I can tell, this was used for the aerial scenes only, and the 65mm cameras were used for the more action-heavy scenes where you don't want to miss anything, and the Photosonics were used for the ultra slow motion scenes, as these are specialist slow motion cameras. As for the lenses, he stuck with Panavision, going with their Primos, C, E and G series, System 65s and super high speeds. All of these are anamorphic, have a pristine image quality, some are more lightweight than others, notably the C series, and all have that signature Panavision quality. When it comes to the stock, for the 35mm scenes it was Vision 250D, Vision 3 250D and 500T, and as for 65mm he had Vision 3 250D and 500T. I don't change stocks to create different looks. I know that works for some cinematographers, but I prefer to change the lighting or exposure, for example. I like the simplicity of using the same stocks. In other words, Pfister does everything in camera.
You mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling.
The underlying idea is that dreams feel real while we're in them, which is actually a line in the film. So I'm going to start with the fact that this lighting feels very real, and this is something that we have seen consistently throughout all of Nolan's films, from Following all the way up to Tenet. So whilst this isn't something that Pfister decided on alone, it was ultimately him that mastered it with Nolan, and he is the reason we still see it in his movies today. But in Inception, it feels like it's reached the peak with Pfister. We don't have the extravagant IMAX, but the way in which the light changes from scene to scene or dream to dream to tell a story while still feeling in the same family is incredible. Now, I'm going to have to throw the term heightened realism in, as I always do with films like this, which in simple terms is when the lighting of a film feels natural and as though it was based off of the organic light, but the cinematographer has added something that makes it feel much more interesting, a kicker, some colour. Basically, it feels more like a dream in this. But I feel like it best applies to Inception, as there is an extremely surreal feeling surrounding the entire film, and apart from the locations and story and acting, it's down to the cinematography to infer that on us. So about this sense of surrealism that I keep mentioning, I know most of it comes from the sets that were built, as I know if it weren't for that train ploughing down the middle of the main road, it wouldn't feel like a surreal moment, but the way in which it's photographed, the slow motion, long lenses, organic lighting, gives it that feeling. And then in the lighting there are moments where there's a use of a soft light, which we correlate with a dreamlike sense of mind, or maybe they use a harsh light when we're in the mountains or on a beach. As I was saying, Pfister has carefully correlated different lighting to different levels of the dream. That's one scene, talking about the gravity situation in the hotel bar, where the camera work and lighting becomes surreal, but it's all part of the storyline. It's still a naturalistic approach in that every source is motivated. What's very unusual is the way it changes. Combined with the set tilting, it creates a very unsettling sensation. But more about the practical side of lighting. A lot of this light feels quite practical, especially in the scene like the rotating corridor. There are a ridiculous amount of practicals, but then again, this is quite a prominent feature in Nolan's films. Now, for a scene like this, they would have had lights shining in as well, but the practicals were all on dimmers that were attached to the rig in order to not have a long reset every time, and this allowed Pfister to freely alter any specific light without trouble. And then to quickly look at a few behind the scenes shots, we can see a lot of diffusion being used, sometimes multiple layers. And in doing this, you actually soften it more, but depending on the material, it will create different effects. For example, a muslin will add an extremely subtle warm hue.
Shall we take a look at some paradoxical architecture? You're gonna have to master.
Now, to touch on more of the techniques Pfister was using, we of course have to start where we left off, with the rotating corridor, as it is without a doubt the most famous part of Inception. Well, maybe that and the staircase, but I'll get onto that in a minute. So I think it's well known that this was a scene that contained minimal CGI. There would have been wires so that the characters could theoretically float, and those would have been taken out later, but we've all seen the behind the scenes of this huge rig, and I think it's pretty safe to say that it wouldn't have had the same effect if it were purely CGI. So how did they do it? Well, first of all, one of the hallways was put vertically. The camera was then placed on a crane of sorts at the bottom, allowing for the zero gravity effect, and then a second set was built that would rotate 360 degrees horizontally, and the camera would then be placed at the end on some sort of crane again, or it would actually be attached to the set in order for it to spin with it. I've probably done a terrible job at explaining this, but hopefully the behind the scenes footage helped. Now, the staircase is an interesting one, but first we need to look at what they are. So these are called Penrose stairs, also known as the impossible staircase, and it's an impossible object, created by a guy called Oscar Rootsvaart in 1937. But what's the importance here, and how did they shoot it? Well, the importance is that it shows that they are in a dream, and the shooting aspect was all an optical illusion.
I devised a sequence whereby you would present it from one angle, the angle of optical illusion where it works.
Overall, Pfister and Nolan did pretty much everything in camera. There were a couple of parts that are physically impossible to do in camera, but when they could, they made it real, and we see that in the film. Then with the lighting, he was able to subtly tell us the mood through strength and colour, and when it comes to the equipment, unfortunately they had to be practical and not shoot on IMAX. I just want to quickly say sorry for the lack of video on Sunday. I was feeling really drained after a week away, and I was pretty ill a few days prior, so I didn't just want to throw something useless together. Thank you for all of the supportive messages though. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Notice if you did, if you have a recommendation for an analysis, leave it down below. Thanks so much for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time. Bye.